The rain drummed softly against the wooden coffin, each drop echoing in the hushed silence of the funeral. A small group of mourners stood solemnly, their faces etched with grief, their whispers carried away by the wind. But the most heart-wrenching sight of all was the German shepherd curled beside the coffin. The dog, a striking mix of golden and black, trembled but did not move. His ears flicked at the sound of soft murmurs, but his eyes remained locked on the wooden box as if willing its occupant to wake up. Max had always been fiercely loyal. From the moment Amelia Vaughn had rescued him, their bond had been unbreakable. And now, even in death, it seemed he would not leave her side. A man stepped forward, Carson Hawley, the director of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. His expression was unreadable, a storm of emotions flashing in his dark eyes. He knelt beside the dog, gently placing a hand on its thick fur. "Max," he whispered. "Come on, buddy. We have to let her go." But Max didn't move. Instead, he let out a low, mournful whimper, his body pressing harder against the coffin, as if shielding Amelia from the world that had declared her gone. No one could explain how Max had escaped the center miles away from the cemetery. No one could explain how he had found his way here. And no one could understand why he refused to leave. Then Carson noticed something that sent a chill down his spine. Max wasn't just lying beside the coffin. He was listening. His ears twitched, his head tilting slightly as if detecting a sound beyond human perception. A thought hit Carson like a thunderbolt. Dogs had been known to sense medical anomalies in humans: cancer, seizures, even signs of life where none seemed present. His breath caught in his throat. "Stop!" Carson's voice sliced through the funeral hush, urgent and desperate. "We have to check her." Gasps rippled through the small crowd. Whispers of disbelief spread like wildfire. "What are you talking about?" someone asked. Carson ignored them. His heart pounded as he pulled out his phone, dialing emergency services with shaking fingers. "This is going to sound insane," he said, his voice raw with urgency. "But I need a medical team here now. I think we made a terrible mistake. I think she's alive." A stunned silence followed. Then, as if in response to Carson's plea, Max let out a sharp, piercing bark, a sound filled with desperate insistence. And in that moment, the impossible became possible. Amelia Vaughn had always found solace in the untamed beauty of the wilderness. From the moment she could walk, she had loved exploring the dense forests and winding trails of the Appalachian foothills, losing herself in the rhythm of nature. Now at 31, she had turned that passion into a career as a wildlife photographer and writer, capturing the raw, unfiltered beauty of the world through her lens. But beneath her adventurous spirit, there was a secret burden she carried: epilepsy. Diagnosed at 19, Amelia had spent years adjusting to a life where unpredictability was her greatest enemy. The seizures came without warning, disrupting her plans, her independence, and at times her confidence. Yet, rather than let the condition define her, she had found ways to adapt. She mapped out trails with easy exits, kept her medication close, and wore a medical alert bracelet at all times. Her motto was simple: "If I have to live with this, I'll do it on my own terms." On a crisp autumn morning, Amelia set out on a photography expedition deep in the Appalachian woods. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and pine. Shafts of golden sunlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the early morning mist that curled between the trees. She had planned this trip for weeks, an opportunity to capture the elusive red fox in its natural habitat. Camera in hand, she moved carefully through the underbrush, every step calculated to avoid disturbing the fragile ecosystem around her. Then she heard it. A faint, pitiful whimper. Amelia froze, her heart hammering in her chest. It was an unmistakable sound, a cry for help. Following the noise, she pushed through a dense thicket of laurel and nearly stumbled over a small, trembling form lying curled at the base of an old oak tree. It was a German Shepherd puppy. The sight of him nearly broke her heart. His fur was a patchwork of mud and dried blood, his ribs visible beneath his matted coat. One of his hind legs was twisted unnaturally, and his breathing was shallow and labored. "Oh, you poor thing," Amelia whispered, kneeling beside him. She reached out carefully, her hands gentle. The pup flinched but made no effort to run. He was too weak. Amelia glanced around, searching for any sign of an owner, but the forest was silent except for the rustling of leaves in the wind. This dog was alone, and he was dying. Without hesitation, Amelia shrugged off her jacket and wrapped it around the trembling pup. She lifted him into her arms, cradling him close to her chest. "It's okay," she murmured, pressing her cheek against his dirt-caked fur. "I've got you now." With a surge of determination, she turned and started back toward her car, her mind already racing through the next steps. She had no idea that this small act of kindness would change her life forever. The drive to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center felt agonizingly slow. Amelia kept glancing at the pup cradled in her jacket, his breath shallow, his body limp against her chest. Every so often, he let out a weak whimper, a reminder that time was running out. "Just hold on, buddy," she whispered, tightening her grip on him. "We're almost there." Her Subaru Outback skidded slightly as she turned onto the gravel road leading to the center. The small, rustic facility sat at the edge of a dense woodland, blending seamlessly with its surroundings. As soon as she parked, she threw open the door and rushed toward the entrance. The moment she stepped inside, a tall man in his mid-30s looked up from behind the reception desk. His sharp green eyes immediately locked onto the bundle in her arms. "I need help," Amelia gasped. "He's injured badly." The man was already moving. "Come with me." She followed him down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and pine wood. He pushed open a door, revealing a small veterinary exam room. The space was clean, but cluttered shelves stacked high with medical supplies, blankets folded neatly in a corner, a whiteboard covered in notes about the animals currently in their care. "Set him down here," the man instructed, motioning to an examination table. Amelia gently laid the pup on the cold metal surface. He barely stirred. The man pulled on a pair of gloves and leaned over the dog, his expression focused. He ran practiced hands over the pup's body, his fingers pausing at the awkward angle of the hind leg. "Compound fracture," he muttered, then checked the gums. "Dehydrated. Severely malnourished. He wouldn't have lasted another day out there." Amelia felt her stomach twist. "Can you save him?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'll do everything I can." His hands moved swiftly, inserting in for fluids, checking vitals, and cleaning a deep gash along the pup's side. Amelia stood frozen, watching his every move. It wasn't until the dog gave a small, pained whimper that the man spoke again. "He needs a name." She blinked. "A name?" "Yeah." He gave her a quick glance. "Animals respond better when they're spoken to directly. You found him, you should name him." Amelia looked down at the frail pup, his fur now damp from the antiseptic. Despite his condition, there was something in his dark brown eyes, something strong. Something unbreakable. "Max," she whispered. "His name is Max." The man gave a small nod. "Max. That's a good name." Amelia swallowed hard. Will he make it?" The man exhaled, removing his gloves. "If he's as strong as his name suggests, yeah. But it's going to take time. He'll need surgery, rehab, and round-the-clock care." "I'll do whatever it takes," Amelia said immediately. That made him pause. "You're willing to help with his recovery?" "Of course," she said without hesitation. "I found him, I won't just walk away." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good." He held out a hand. "I'm Carson Hawley, director of this facility. She took his hand, his grip firm and warm. "Amelia Vaughn." "Well, Amelia Vaughn," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Looks like you just signed up for more than you bargained for." Amelia glanced at Max, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. "That's okay," she said softly. "I think we were meant to find each other." Carson studied her for a moment before nodding. "Let's get to work then." The days turned into weeks, and Max's recovery was slow but steady. Amelia found herself visiting the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center almost daily, her initial concern for Max evolving into something deeper. She had always felt a strong connection to animals, but with Max, it was different. He wasn't just another rescue, he was hers. At first, Carson had been skeptical of her commitment. He had seen too many people bring in an injured animal, only to disappear once the hard work began. But Amelia proved him wrong. She showed up every morning, eager to help, asking questions about his treatment, learning how to care for him properly. She even started assisting with other animals at the center, helping feed orphaned raccoons, cleaning enclosures, and keeping Carson company during late-night check-ins. "You don't have to do all this, you know," Carson told her one evening as they sat outside the center, watching the sun dip below the tree line. Amelia leaned back against the wooden railing of the porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands. "I want to." Carson studied her for a moment before nodding. "Max is lucky to have you." She smiled. "I think I'm the lucky one." They fell into a comfortable rhythm. Carson, with his quiet and methodical nature, and Amelia, with her boundless energy and curiosity. Their conversations drifted beyond animals and medicine to books, travel, childhood memories. Carson told her about how he had once been a lawyer, practicing environmental law in a high-rise office, before realizing he belonged in the wild, working hands-on with the creatures he fought to protect. Amelia, in turn, shared her struggles with epilepsy, the dreams she had to abandon, the constant fear of losing control. "You don't let it stop you," Carson noted one night as they sat beside Max's recovery pen. She chuckled, a little bitter. "I try not to. But it does sometimes." Carson was quiet for a moment. "You find ways to adapt," he finally said. "That's what survivors do." Their eyes met in the dim light, something unspoken passing between them. And then Max, as if sensing the weight of the moment, let out a loud, exaggerated sigh and flopped onto his side, breaking the tension. Amelia laughed, reaching through the bars to scratch behind his ears. "Drama queen." Carson smirked. "Yeah, I think he's going to be just fine." And for the first time in a long time, Amelia started to believe that maybe she would be too. It started with a flicker. A moment of dizziness that Amelia brushed off as exhaustion. She had spent the day hiking to a remote clearing with Carson, documenting the rehabilitation progress of a young fox they were preparing to release. The golden afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then the world tilted. She steadied herself against a nearby tree, blinking rapidly. Carson was a few steps ahead, setting up a camera trap. He hadn't noticed. She inhaled slowly, willing the sensation to pass. "Not now. Not here." Max, trotting faithfully at her side, suddenly stopped. His ears perked, his body stiffening. He let out a low whine and nudged her thigh with his nose. The concern in his deep brown eyes sent a chill down her spine. "Amelia?" Carson's voice cut through the haze. She forced a smile. "Yeah?" He turned, frowning at the way she leaned against the tree. "You okay?" She straightened, nodding too quickly. "Just a little lightheaded." Carson didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, Max barked, short, sharp, insistent. The noise startled a flock of birds from the treetops, their wings rustling as they scattered. Amelia's pulse quickened. And then the world collapsed. A flash of white-hot pain shot through her skull as her body betrayed her. Her knees buckled. The last thing she saw was Carson's horrified expression as he lunged toward her. Then everything dissolved into darkness. Max's frantic barking echoed through the forest. Carson caught her just before she hit the ground, but her body had already gone rigid, muscles locked in a violent seizure. Her eyes rolled back, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He had seen seizures before, but this was different, longer, more intense. Panic surged through him as he cradled her, his mind racing through every bit of medical knowledge he had. Stay calm. Keep her safe. Do not let fear take over. Max was beside them in an instant, barking furiously, his body tense with alarm. He nudged Amelia's face, whining, as if willing her to respond. Carson dug his phone out of his pocket, his fingers shaking as he dialed for help. No signal. His heart pounded harder. They were deep in the forest, miles away from the center, with no way to call for immediate assistance. Amelia's convulsions finally slowed, her body going limp. But her breathing was wrong, uneven, too faint. Carson pressed 2 fingers against her neck, searching for a pulse. It was weak. Too weak. He had to move, now. He scooped her up, adjusting her weight against his chest. "Come on, Amelia, stay with me," he murmured, his voice tight with urgency. Max trotted beside him, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face. Carson pushed forward, forcing his way through dense undergrowth, his muscles burning as he carried her over uneven terrain. He had to get her back to the center. Had to keep her breathing. Had to run. The trail stretched ahead, endless and unforgiving. Carson's breaths were ragged, his legs screaming in protest, but he didn't stop. Amelia's life depended on him. And Max, loyal, relentless Max, matched his pace step for step, his low whimpers the only sound in the suffocating silence of the forest. The wildlife center came into view just as Carson felt Amelia's body slacken even more in his arms. A cold dread seized him. "Hang on, Amelia," he pleaded, kicking the door open with his foot. "Just hang on." The emergency room was a blur of bright lights and rapid voices. Carson stood frozen at the edge of the room, watching helplessly as the medical team worked on Amelia. Her skin was deathly pale, her body unresponsive. A nurse barked out vitals, blood pressure dropping, heart rate unstable. Max had been left outside, his distressed whimpers barely muffled by the thick hospital doors. Carson's fists clenched as he struggled to breathe. He had carried her through the forest, had whispered desperate pleas into her ear, had run until his legs nearly gave out, yet now he could do nothing. The minutes stretched endlessly. Machines beeped. A doctor adjusted and 4. Someone shouted for another dose of medication. Then silence. Carson's heart lurched as the doctor stepped back, shoulders heavy with defeat. The words that followed shattered his world. Time of death, 10:42 p.m. His ears rang. His pulse roared in his skull. No, no. This wasn't happening. Amelia wasn't gone. She couldn't be. But the truth was staring him in the face. The still body on the hospital bed. The monitors flatlining. The lifeless hand that had once gripped his with so much strength. Carson staggered back as the doctor approached him, speaking in a low, measured tone. "It appears she suffered a prolonged seizure that led to cardiac arrest. I'm so sorry." Sorry? The word felt hollow, meaningless. He had seen Amelia fight for so much, for her independence, for the animals she loved, for every damn moment of her life. And now, it had been ripped away in an instant. The next few hours passed in a fog. He made the necessary calls. Arrangements were made. Amelia's next of kin, a distant cousin, agreed to a natural burial, just as Amelia had wanted. It was all happening too fast. 3 days later, Carson stood among a small gathering of mourners in the Green Haven Natural Cemetery, surrounded by towering oaks. The wooden coffin, simple and unadorned, rested on the damp earth. The sky above was an eerie shade of gray. But something wasn't right. Max, who had been kept in a secure enclosure at the center, had escaped. No one knew how. No one knew where he had gone. Until now. A rustling in the nearby underbrush made Carson turn. Gasps rippled through the mourners as Max appeared at the edge of the clearing, his fur bristling, his chest heaving. His eyes locked onto the coffin. And then, with a desperate, anguished growl, he launched himself forward. He clawed at the wooden surface, barking wildly, his powerful paws scratching deep gouges into the polished wood. The frantic desperation in his movements sent a shiver down Carson's spine. Max wasn't mourning. He was trying to get inside. Something snapped inside Carson. His mind reeled, piecing together what seemed impossible. Max had always been sensitive to Amelia's seizures. He had sensed them before they even started. And now, his instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The realization struck him like a thunderclap. Amelia wasn't dead. "Stop!" Carson's voice cut through the murmurs of the crowd. He lunged forward, shoving past stunned onlookers. "We have to open the coffin. Now, Carson, what are you?" "She's alive." His voice cracked with urgency. "She's in a state of catalepsy. Her vitals were too low to detect." Max knows. "He's telling us." Doubt flickered in the eyes around him, but Carson didn't wait for permission. He dropped to his knees, gripping the coffin's lid. With a strength fueled by sheer desperation, he yanked it open. The moment the wood gave way, a collective gasp echoed through the clearing. Amelia lay motionless inside, but her chest rose. Barely. Then her fingers twitched. Chaos erupted. Someone called 911. The next few minutes were a blur of movement. Carson pressed his fingers to her neck, faint pulse. Max whined, nudging her face, licking her hand. Carson's own hands shook as he lifted her out of the coffin, cradling her against him. Her lips parted. A weak breath. Then another. And then, in the faintest whisper, she spoke. "Carson." Tears blurred his vision. "I'm here. You're safe." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, but all Carson could hear was the sound of Amelia breathing. She was alive. And Max, her fierce, loyal protector, had saved her from the grave. Amelia's world came back in pieces, fragments of sensation, muffled sounds, warmth against her skin. Her mind swam through a heavy fog, trapped between darkness and consciousness. She was floating, weightless, her body distant and unresponsive. But there was something familiar anchoring her, something solid pressing against her hand. A warmth. A presence. A wet nose nudged her cheek. Then a soft whimper. The sound tugged at her, pulling her further from the abyss. Her eyelids fluttered, struggling against the weight of exhaustion. The world remained hazy, but she could make out blurred shapes, dim lights, the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor. A sterile scent filled her nose, antiseptic, clean linen, something vaguely metallic. A hospital. And then she heard it. Amelia? Her name, spoken with such raw emotion that it sliced through the fog like a blade. She turned toward the voice, her vision sharpening just enough to see Carson sitting beside her, his hands gripping hers as if he feared she would vanish. His eyes, usually so controlled, so steady, were red-rimmed, his expression torn between relief and disbelief. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry, her voice nothing more than a croak. Carson reached for a cup of water, carefully tilting the straw toward her lips. She drank in small sips, each drop bringing her further back into reality. "What happened?" she finally managed. Carson exhaled a shaky breath. You were declared dead." His voice faltered. "They put you in a coffin, Amelia. They were about to bury you." A shiver ran down her spine. Her mind struggled to grasp the enormity of his words. Declared dead? But she was here. Breathing. Alive. Then, as if sensing her distress, a weight pressed against her side. She turned her head slowly, and there was Max, curled up beside her on the hospital bed. His ears twitched, his soulful brown eyes filled with something that could only be described as devotion. Memories came rushing back. The seizure. The darkness. Max barking, clawing at her coffin, refusing to let them put her in the ground. "Max," she whispered, running weak fingers through his fur. The dog let out a low, happy whine, licking her hand. Carson swallowed hard. "He saved you, Amelia. If he hadn't, I don't even want to think about it." Tears welled in her eyes as the full weight of everything hit her. She had been moments away from being lost forever, but Max, her fearless, loyal companion, had sensed what no human could. She turned back to Carson, her voice thick with emotion. "You believed him." He let out a breathless chuckle, shaking his head. "I didn't want to at first. It sounded crazy. But then I saw him, the way he wouldn't leave your side, the way he knew something was wrong. And I couldn't ignore it." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with gratitude, with unspoken words that didn't need to be said. Amelia squeezed Carson's hand, her strength slowly returning. "Thank you for not giving up on me." His grip tightened. "Never." Max gave a happy huff, settling against her, as if knowing his job was finally done. She was alive. And because of them, because of him, she had a second chance. 2 months had passed since Amelia's miraculous revival, but the weight of what had happened still clung to her. Some nights, she woke up breathless, heart pounding, the sensation of being trapped in that coffin haunting her like a ghost. Other nights, she dreamt of Max's frantic paws scratching against the wood, his desperate whimpers pulling her back from the brink of death. But every morning, when she opened her eyes and saw Max curled up beside her, she knew she was still here. Alive. Recovery had been slow, but with Carson's constant presence and Max's unwavering companionship, she grew stronger each day. The doctors had adjusted her medication, ensuring she would never slip into catalepsy again. And though the experience had shaken her to her core, she refused to let fear control her life. One crisp autumn morning, Amelia and Carson stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the golden leaves swayed in the breeze. It was the same trail where she had first found Max, broken and starving. Now he stood beside her, healthy, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. "It's time, isn't it?" she murmured, her hand resting on Max's back. Carson nodded. "He's ready." Max had always been a creature of two worlds, part loyal companion, part untamed spirit. And though he had spent months at her side, Amelia knew, deep in her heart, that he belonged to the wild. She had seen it in the way his ears perked at distant sounds, the way his body tensed when he caught the scent of something unseen. He was meant to roam free. Carson kneeled down, ruffling Max's fur. "You saved her life, buddy. Twice. I think that means you're officially the greatest dog in history." Max let out a soft huff, leaning into Carson's touch before turning back to Amelia. She swallowed against the lump in her throat and crouched beside him, pressing her forehead gently to his. "I love you," she whispered. "You'll always be my boy." Max licked her cheek once, then took a step back. And then another. He hesitated for just a moment, his eyes locking onto hers, as if memorizing every detail before turning and bounding into the trees. Within seconds, he had melted into the wilderness, his golden fur blending with the dappled light. Amelia exhaled slowly, blinking away the sting in her eyes. Carson's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "He'll be okay," he murmured. She nodded, watching the place where Max had disappeared. "Yeah, he will." But deep down, she knew this wasn't truly goodbye. And she was right. Months later, on a quiet evening at the Wildlife Center, Carson was locking up when Amelia's soft gasp made him pause. She stood frozen on the porch, staring into the tree line. Carson followed her gaze, and there, in the fading light, stood a familiar silhouette. Max. His eyes gleamed in the dusk, watching them from a distance. He didn't move closer, didn't step into the light. But he was there. Amelia's breath hitched. She took a single step forward. Max? For a brief moment, he held her gaze then. With the grace of a wild creature, he turned and slipped back into the forest. A tear traced down Amelia's cheek, but she smiled. Some bonds could never be broken.